What if every single thing you have worked so tirelessly to acquire is actually the very mechanism of your imprisonment? You have been told that freedom is a destination purchased with wealth, secured by status, and validated by the applause of polite society. Yet, as you climb this invisible ladder, the air grows thinner and the demands on your soul grow infinitely heavier. Consider the terrifying possibility that your definition of success is merely a gilded cage designed by a culture that profits from your perpetual dissatisfaction. We live in a state of profound cognitive dissonance, the psychological tension experienced when your beliefs contradict your actions. You crave absolute autonomy, yet you chain yourself to mortgages, titles, and the fleeting approval of strangers. You tell yourself that just a little more money, just one more promotion, will finally buy you the breathing room to live authentically. This is the great illusion of the modern age, a collective hallucination that equates accumulation with liberation, blinding you to the reality that true autonomy requires shedding, not gathering. Long before the modern rat race, ancient Athens was a thriving metropolis obsessed with power, commerce, and intellectual prestige. It was a society that measured a citizen by their lineage, their rhetoric, and their material wealth. Into this epicenter of civilized vanity walked Diogenes of Sinope, a man who would become history's most notorious renegade. Exiled from his homeland, he arrived in the city with nothing, choosing to live in a large ceramic jar in the marketplace. He was not a victim of circumstance, but a deliberate architect of his own radical reality. He became the founding father of Cynic philosophy, a school of thought that demanded a rejection of conventional desires in favor of a simple life in agreement with nature. In its original context, cynicism was not the bitter pessimism we associate with the word today. It was a rigorous, active practice of unmasking societal hypocrisy and pursuing virtue through action rather than mere theoretical debate. The cynic believed that true happiness depended solely on self-sufficiency and mental clarity, entirely independent of external circumstances or the arbitrary rules of society. To live this truth requires a terrifying plunge into vulnerability, stripping away the armor of social conformity. Diogenes embraced radical asceticism, the severe self-discipline and avoidance of all forms of indulgence, not to punish himself, but to fortify his mind against the seduction of comfort. Imagine the profound psychological friction of willingly surrendering your reputation, your comfort, and your social standing. Most people would crumble under the weight of public mockery, yet for the man from Sinope, the scorn of the crowd was merely confirmation that he was on the right path. His father had been a banker, and historical accounts suggest Diogenes was exiled for defacing the currency of his home city. Whether literal or metaphorical, this act became the defining blueprint of his entire existence. He spent his life defacing the currency of human vanity, challenging the arbitrary values society placed on gold, fame, and political power. He recognized that as long as you accept the currency of the crowd, you are subject to its fluctuating exchange rates, forever trading your authentic self for counterfeit approval. This relentless pursuit of truth led to his most iconic and provocative gesture. He was known to walk through the bustling Athenian marketplace in broad daylight, holding a lit lantern up to the faces of startled citizens. When asked what he was doing, he would reply that he was just looking for one honest man. The lantern was not to illuminate the physical darkness, but to expose the moral blindness of a society entirely consumed by superficiality and self-deception. He found politicians, merchants, and scholars, but he struggled to find a genuine human being. Where are you carrying a lantern in the blind daylight of your own existence? Look closely at the rooms you enter, the negotiations you navigate, and the relationships you maintain. How often are you playing a role, reciting a script written by someone else, desperately hoping to be perceived as successful, normal, or acceptable? The search for an honest human being must begin in the mirror, demanding that you confront the ways you have traded your own authenticity for the convenient, comfortable lies of the herd. The ultimate test of this philosophical defiance occurred in Corinth, where the ragged philosopher was quietly sunning himself. Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the known world, a conqueror who held the fate of nations in his hand, approached the man in the barrel. Thrilled to meet the infamous thinker, the young king stood over him and offered to grant him any wish he desired. Wealth, land, power, or protection, it was all within Alexander's gift. Diogenes barely opened his eyes, looked at the ruler of the world, and simply asked him to stand a little out of his sun. In that singular, breathtaking moment, the entire hierarchy of human power was inverted. The man who owned nothing possessed an unassailable sovereignty that the man who owned the world could only envy. Alexander could conquer empires, but he could not conquer his own insatiable desire for more. Diogenes had conquered himself, rendering the king's vast wealth and terrifying armies entirely irrelevant. The request to simply move out of the sunlight was a masterclass in absolute detachment, proving that true power is the ability to need absolutely nothing from those who believe they have everything to give. The conqueror's reaction revealed the profound impact of this encounter. As his entourage mocked the ragged philosopher, Alexander silenced them, stating that if he were not Alexander, he would wish to be Diogenes. The king recognized a mirror image of his own ambition, inverted and perfected. While Alexander sought to master the external world through endless conquest and bloodshed, the man in the jar had mastered the internal world through ruthless subtraction. One was a slave to his ambition, the other was the absolute monarch of his own mind. Achieving this level of internal monarchy requires confronting the darkest corners of your own psyche. This is the essence of shadow work, the psychological practice of exploring the unconscious, repressed, or denied parts of your personality. We hide our insecurities behind expensive watches, prestigious degrees, and carefully curated digital personas. To embrace the path of the Cynic is to drag those shadows into the blazing sunlight, acknowledging your fears of inadequacy and rejection, and realizing that they only hold power over you as long as you refuse to look at them. The depth of this self-mastery was tested again when Diogenes was captured by pirates and put up for sale in a slave market. When the auctioneer asked what trade he knew, he loudly proclaimed that he knew how to govern men and told the auctioneer to sell him to someone who needed a master. Even in chains, facing a life of brutal servitude, his internal reality remained entirely unbroken. He refused to adopt the psychology of a victim, instantly reframing his captivity as an opportunity to assert his dominance over his prospective owners. He was purchased by a wealthy Corinthian named Xeniades, who quickly realized he had not bought a servant but a teacher. Diogenes was placed in charge of his master's sons, passing on his rigorous discipline and austere values. The physical reality of his legal status was rendered meaningless by the sheer force of his character. Self-mastery is the ultimate unassailable fortress. When your identity is anchored entirely in your own virtue and your own choices, no external force, no economic collapse, and no societal rejection can ever truly enslave you. How much of your current identity is tied to things that can be taken away by a market crash, a corporate restructuring, or a sudden shift in public opinion? If you stripped away your job title, your bank account, and your social media following, what exactly would be left? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, you are living on borrowed time and a rented foundation. You are a hostage to fortune, placing the keys to your psychological well-being in the pockets of a world that owes you absolutely nothing. Centuries before it became a formalized school of thought, this radical approach foreshadowed existentialism, the philosophy emphasizing individual existence, freedom, and choice. The core tenet is that we are not born with a predefined essence or purpose. Rather, we must create our own meaning through our actions and decisions in an absurd, chaotic universe. Diogenes did not wait for the gods or the city-state to assign him a role. He carved his own meaning out of the bedrock of his defiance, proving that authenticity is not found, but violently forged. His disdain for empty intellectualism was legendary, frequently putting him at odds with the great minds of his era. When Plato, the towering figure of Athenian philosophy, defined a human being as a featherless biped, Diogenes plucked a chicken, brought it into the academy, and declared, "Behold, Plato's man." This was not merely a crude prank, but a devastating critique of theoretical abstraction disconnected from lived reality. He despised philosophers who only talked about virtue, demanding that true wisdom be demonstrated through the visceral, messy reality of daily action. The physical toll of his lifestyle was undoubtedly severe, enduring the freezing winters and scorching summers of ancient Greece with nothing but a cloak, a staff, and a leather pouch. Yet, this extreme physical hardship purchased an unparalleled mental liberation. By training his body to endure the harshest conditions, he eliminated the fear of poverty and discomfort that paralyzes the vast majority of humanity. He lived in absolute alignment with nature, observing that animals do not suffer from anxiety about their social status or fret over their retirement portfolios. He radically redefined the concept of poverty, transforming it from a condition of shameful lack into a state of supreme tactical advantage. The wealthiest man is not the one who has the most, but the one who needs the least. When you require fine dining, constant entertainment, and luxurious accommodations to feel at peace, you are burdened by 1,000 fragile dependencies. By reducing his needs to the absolute biological minimum, the philosopher achieved a state of invulnerability. He had nothing to lose, which meant he had absolutely everything to gain. We are biologically wired to fear ostracization, evolving in tribes where exile meant certain death in the wilderness. This primal fear is the invisible leash that keeps you conforming to a culture you secretly despise. You nod at meetings, you buy the branded clothing, and you participate in the hollow rituals of modern networking, all to avoid the terrifying prospect of standing alone. To break this leash requires overriding millions of years of evolutionary programming. Accepting that in the modern world, standing apart from the herd is often the only way to survive with your soul intact. The echoes of his resolve followed him through history, laying the very groundwork for what would become a dominant worldview. Cynicism directly birthed Stoicism, the philosophy of maximizing positive emotions, reducing negative emotions, and honing one's virtues of character. Zeno of Citium, the founder of the Stoic school, learned his foundational lessons from Crates, who was a direct disciple of the man in the barrel. The Stoic ideal of focusing only on what you can control and ignoring what you cannot is a direct descendant of that lantern-bearing madman. You are being invited to step out of your own self-imposed barrel of expectations. You do not need to discard all your worldly possessions or live on the street to apply this radical wisdom. The challenge is to cultivate a cynic's detachment within the heavy machinery of the modern world. Can you hold your wealth, your relationships, and your status with an open hand, ready to let them go without losing your core identity? Can you walk through the corporate marketplace with your own internal lantern, refusing to accept the counterfeit values being sold to you? The moment you realize that true freedom requires the courage to be intensely disliked, a profound shift occurs. You stop negotiating with your own potential, you stop apologizing for your ambition, and you stop watering down your truth to make it palatable for those who are committed to their own mediocrity. The armor of societal approval shatters, revealing a core of unyielding, unapologetic purpose. You become dangerous to the status quo, because a person who cannot be bought, shamed, or intimidated is a force of nature that cannot be controlled. The legacy of the madman of Athens is not a blueprint for homelessness, but a timeless mirror held up to the absurdities of human civilization. He forces us to question why we work so hard to impress people we do not even respect. His life is a testament to the terrifying power of absolute conviction. He proved that a single individual, armed with nothing but a sharp mind and an unbreakable will, can mock empires, humble conquerors, and carve a name into eternity without ever lifting a sword or minting a single coin. The path of the renegade noble is not found in the accumulation of external trophies, but in the ruthless excavation of your own authentic nature. It is time to stop asking the world for permission to live on your own terms. Discard the heavy, useless armor of other people's expectations. Ignite your own lantern. Walk boldly into the blinding daylight of your existence. Demand the truth from yourself. And when the empires of modern distraction try to cast a shadow over your purpose, look them in the eye and tell them to stand a little out of your sun.